How could a single switch bring down a plane full of people? Today, we'll be diving into the tragic story of Helios Airways Flight 522 and how the position of one switch in the cockpit led to disaster. The Helios Airways Flight 522 incident began a day before the crash, on August 13, 2005. The Boeing 737-300 aircraft completed a routine flight, but the cabin crew reported unusual noises from the right AFT door and observed that the door's seal appeared frozen, indicating a possible pressurization problem. This issue was logged and the maintenance crew was notified. During their night shift, the engineers conducted a pressurization check. This process required setting the pressurization mode selector switch from auto to manual to close the outflow valve and pressurize the aircraft using the APU. Despite stating they had reset the switch back to auto, the investigation revealed that it likely remained in manual. In an aircraft, maintaining proper cabin pressure is crucial for the safety and comfort of passengers and crew. As a plane climbs to higher altitudes, the outside air pressure drops significantly, making it difficult to breathe without supplemental oxygen. To counteract this, the aircraft's pressurization system adjusts the cabin pressure to levels similar to those at ground level, where breathing is easier. The pressurization mode selector switch is essential in managing this process. When set to auto, the system automatically controls the cabin pressure, ensuring it remains at safe levels as the plane ascends or descends. However, if the switch is mistakenly left in the manual position, the automatic control is disabled and the pressure must be manually regulated, which is typically only done during maintenance checks. On the morning of August 14, 2005, the crew prepared for the flight. The captain was Hans-Jürgen Merten, a 59-year-old East German contract pilot hired by Helios for holiday flights. He had been flying for 35 years, having previously worked for Interflug from 1970 to 1991 and had accrued a total of 16,900 flight hours, including 5,500 hours on the Boeing 737. Merten was known for being strict and sometimes difficult to work with. The first officer was Pampos Charalambous, a 51-year-old Cypriot pilot who had flown exclusively for Helios for the past 5 years. He had accumulated 7,549 flight hours throughout his career, with 3,991 of them on the Boeing 737. Despite his extensive experience, Charalambous had a history of occasionally skipping procedural steps. During their pre-flight checks, the first officer was responsible for setting the pressurization panel. This included ensuring the pressurization mode selector was in auto. However, it's possible he overlooked this due to perceived time constraints or because he was familiar with the selector's usual position. The pre-flight checklist should have caught the switch's incorrect position, but it didn't. After completing their checks, the aircraft taxied and took off normally at 6:07. They missed another opportunity to catch the error during the after-takeoff checklist, which included checking the pressurization system indicators. As the aircraft climbed, the outflow valve, set to manual, remained open, leading to gradual depressurization. At around 10,000 feet, the cabin altitude warning horn sounded. This alarm is designed to alert the crew to potential hypoxia, indicating a situation where there may be insufficient oxygen supply due to depressurization at high altitudes or other conditions leading to reduced oxygen levels. It is identical in sound to the takeoff configuration warning horn, which normally signals that the aircraft is not properly configured for takeoff and is on the ground. In the Boeing 737 aircraft, both warning horns produce the same sound. The critical difference lies in their context. The takeoff configuration warning horn should only be audible on the ground, whereas hearing it in the air indicates a cabin altitude warning. Modern 737 aircraft now include visual indications for these warnings. Mistakenly identifying the alarm as an erroneous takeoff warning, the captain communicated with the dispatcher and an engineer that they were experiencing a takeoff configuration warning issue. This communication took precedence over donning their oxygen masks and following the correct procedure for cabin altitude warnings. This critical misidentification led them down the wrong troubleshooting path. In the incident involving Helios Airways Flight 522, the oxygen masks in the cockpit did not deploy because the aircraft's altitude of around 10,000 feet did not trigger their automatic release. These masks are designed to deploy when cabin pressure drops significantly, usually above 14,000 to 15,000 feet, to ensure the flight crew can maintain consciousness and safely operate the plane during a rapid depressurization. The aircraft experienced a problem with its equipment cooling system, essential for maintaining the functionality of onboard electronics by regulating temperatures to prevent overheating. This system was likely activated as a result of the aircraft's depressurization, complicating the situation for the flight crew. Alongside dealing with alarms and warnings, this additional issue may have distracted them from recognizing indicators such as the unexpected deployment of passenger cabin oxygen masks, which were crucial signals of the ongoing depressurization. The cockpit, although part of the same aircraft, is equipped with different ventilation and pressure monitoring systems compared to the passenger cabin. Due to a pressurization system issue where the pressurization mode selector was incorrectly set to manual instead of auto, the cockpit did not reach the altitude threshold required for the automatic deployment of oxygen masks. Consequently, the masks in the cockpit did not deploy automatically. This prevented the pilots from receiving critical indications and promptly realizing the pressurization problem. Instead, they mistakenly focused on addressing the takeoff configuration alarm and equipment cooling alarms. This misunderstanding meant they did not correctly identify the pressing issue with the pressurization system, thereby preventing them from providing proper instructions to the cabin crew and passengers. When the oxygen masks did deploy in the passenger cabin, confusion persisted among passengers due to the lack of communication from the cockpit. Without instructions or reassurance from the flight crew, passengers were left uncertain about the seriousness of the situation and what actions to take. The cabin crew may have expected the pilots to descend to a lower altitude where oxygen masks wouldn't be needed, but instead, the aircraft continued to climb. This misunderstanding between crew expectations and the actual flight conditions contributed to the confusion and tragic outcome of the incident. Moreover, the passenger oxygen masks provided oxygen for only about 12 minutes, insufficient for the prolonged flight at high altitude. Soon thereafter, all occupants fell unconscious. At 28,900 feet, the last communication from the cockpit was recorded. Shortly after this altitude, both pilots likely succumbed to hypoxia. Rapid decompression at high altitudes can swiftly impair cognitive function and induce unconsciousness within minutes. It is probable that the crew became incapacitated due to hypoxia before they could recognize the critical need to wear their oxygen masks. The low pressure and resultant hypoxia would have significantly compromised the pilot's mental clarity, decision-making abilities, and response times. The aircraft continued to climb to 34,000 feet and flew on autopilot along its programmed route towards Athens, failing to descend or change course as it should have. Nonetheless, Helios Flight 522 proceeded with unresponsive pilots at the command. Air traffic control began to recognize that something was unusual when they lost radio contact with the aircraft and observed it flying on autopilot with no response to radio calls. This raised alarms because it indicated a potential problem with communication or control of the aircraft. As they continued to monitor the situation, they observed the aircraft entering a holding pattern and later drifting off course, which further indicated that the crew might be incapacitated or unable to control the plane. ATC attempted multiple times to establish contact with the flight, but their efforts were unsuccessful. This prompted them to notify relevant authorities and begin coordinating with other agencies to understand the situation and initiate appropriate responses. Efforts to establish communication with the aircraft were unsuccessful as it entered different airspaces. Greek F-16 fighters were subsequently dispatched to intercept the unresponsive plane. Upon interception, the fighter pilots observed that both pilots in the cockpit were unconscious. Additionally, a flight attendant who potentially held a commercial pilot license but lacked specific training for the Boeing 737 entered the cockpit to assist after the pilots became incapacitated and attempted to assume control of the aircraft. He waved to the F-16 fighter pilots as they approached and attempted to signal to them. He made multiple attempts to control the aircraft and to establish communication. He sent multiple Mayday distress calls, but they were incomplete and unintelligible. However, he eventually also fell unconscious and became unresponsive. There was no indication that the passengers reacted to the presence of the fighter jets. Unfortunately, both engines flamed out due to fuel exhaustion. The aircraft descended and crashed into hills near Athens, resulting in the tragic loss of all 121 on board. Many of the bodies recovered were burned beyond recognition by the post-impact fire. Autopsies on the crash victims showed that all were alive at the time of impact, but it could not be determined whether they were conscious. The investigation concluded that the primary cause was the failure to recognize and correct the pressurization switch's position. Contributing factors included procedural oversights, misidentification of the alarm, poor CRM, crew resource management, and inadequate safety culture and training within Helios Airways. This tragic event led to significant changes in aviation procedures, cockpit design, and training, ultimately enhancing the safety of air travel. Thank you for watching this episode. Please leave your comments below. See you in the next video.